I want to start with how Monday Night Rugby ended, actually. Gordon Darcy was on with Adrian, and he just, as we were out of time, kind of talked about the possibility of an Ireland Grand Slam, Cian, and was like, I really hope we don't win the Grand Slam this year. We want to be able to see how teams can pick us apart for the bigger games to come. And I just immediately was thinking to myself, like, where are we with this tournament? I suppose, is this the competitive warm-up, or is this a tournament in itself where a Grand Slam is a possibility for Ireland and we don't win too many of them?
Well, I don't think you want to go down the Eddie Jones kind of route of devaluing the Six Nations, which is really what he did over the last few years, and it might have ended up costing him his job. Look, Ireland are never going to take a Six Nations lightly, and nor should they. And we do, and I'm guilty of it as the next person, getting obsessed with World Cups, and I suppose there's a reason why, because Ireland have never been past a quarter final. But we saw it in 2019 what can happen when you lose momentum. Like, the whole thing fell to pot. So I don't think necessarily if Ireland won the Grand Slam doesn't mean that they're going to get to a World Cup semi-final, nor does it mean that now a disastrous Six Nations I think is different. But if they didn't win the Six Nations but actually played well and lost to, let's say hypothetically, a very good French team, that doesn't mean that the World Cup will go to pot either. So I don't think we'll see like a huge amount of experimentation. I think we've seen that from the squad that Andy Farrell has picked. I think you'll see, a guy like Jamie Osborne might get his debut potentially against Italy. Tom Stewart has come in. He could be worth a look as well, depending on Ronan Kelleher's injury. But the squad has a very settled feel to it, the Six Nations squad. And I would say, it's a 33-man World Cup squad is going to be picked in August or whatever it is. And I would say, injury permitting, Andy Farrell probably has 30, if not 31 of those players picked already. Now, there's still scope for a bolter like Jamie Osborne could be, but I think it's about, fine-tuning from an Irish point of view. You look at what England and Wales are doing, and they're very much at the opposite end of the scale. So I think we saw enough in November that teams were starting to figure out Ireland a little bit. Like, you can't say that Ireland, they were outstanding in the second and third test in New Zealand last summer, but I don't think you could say in November that they went to another level or anything. So I think that's enough to keep everyone's kind of feet on the ground and kind of, not get complacent at all, which maybe perhaps there was a tinge of that in 2019.
Yeah, keep them honest. Matt, in fairness to Gordon, for people who didn't hear it wasn't about kind of like experimenting or like not taking the Six Nations seriously, but I suppose it's more from a coach's point of view, from your point of view, as a coach looking in at it, there is a value to sort of seeing us being figured out in some way by some coach early rather than in the first, in the pool stages of the World Cup, if that was to be the case.
Yeah, look, I think the reality is Australia had Ireland figured out. They should have beaten Australia, Ireland for sure. And Australia are ranked, 7th? I don't think there's anything. The beauty of where we are in the world is there's nothing between the top 8 teams. And last season proved that. Australia came within an inch of beating France and Ireland, who were 1 and 2 in the world. They beat South Africa, and they should have beaten New Zealand. But they're ranked, I can't remember exactly, 7 or 8. Let's put it, but they're not in the top 6. So, and I'm not saying that because I'm Australian. I'm using it as an example. What Ireland have got to find out is they've got to find a way to be resilient and to keep developing and keep growing. And I think they did that in November. They didn't attack with the same brilliant fluency they did in New Zealand, but they found a way. And that's what you've got to do at World Cups. If you look at the history of World Cups, teams that make the final, there are 1 or 2 games along the way where they struggle. Australia, almost lost to Samoa in '91. France did almost. Did they lose to Tonga or draw with Tonga in when they made the final in New Zealand? There is a game somewhere along the way that you're going to struggle in a World Cup. So I just don't subscribe to this thing that it's the Six Nations or the World Cup. You want to be competitive. You want to be competitive. England won the World Cup, won the Six Nations and the World Cup in 2003. They went at it. It's a habit of winning. It's fighting. It's going. And if you lose a game, and I agree with Kenneth, the game of the tournament to me is France-Ireland on Saturday week, and I think whoever wins that will win the tournament. If Ireland lose that game, that is not the end of the world. That is not the end of the world. But they're not mutually unexclusive. Now, in the past, Ireland has not prepared well for World Cups, and I've seen this. I've been there for 20 years and I've watched it before I even got there. They didn't prepare well. Andy Farrell has prepared exceptionally well for this World Cup over the last 12 months. The number of players given opportunity to, the way he's put time and effort into the A teams and the developing teams has been exceptional. And he is reaping those benefits. And now, from Saturday on, this is about elite high-performance competition week in, week out. And Andy Farrell and Ireland are in a good place. That guarantees nothing. But I tell you what, they're in a lot better place now than Ireland were in 2019.
Yeah, because 2019, Cian, it's like, that wasn't the Six Nations not taken seriously, but it's when the wheels came off. I suppose we weren't to know that until we played England that day, but there's no sense that the Ireland team kind of reached its peak last year in the way that it probably did in 2018.
Yeah, like if you remember back coming into that 2019 Six Nations, Ireland beat the All Blacks in November, so you were still riding the crest of the wave off the back of a Grand Slam, the tour down in Australia as well. So there was a lot of things. That's why Ireland got a little bit of a wake up call, and that might be a little bit strong in November. But like Matt said, they still found a way to get the job done in all three games, and that's not a bad place to be. And look, when you're number one ranked team in the world, and the rankings are a bit of a mess anyway, I don't think anyone should really pay too much attention to that, but like you'd have to say, like, Ireland's attack is definitely one of the most fluid, if not the best in the world. And what happens when that's the case is that opposition coaches are studying you to the absolute nth degree. And like, this is something I remember I was talking to Mike Prendergast about when he was at Racing before he came back and joined Munster, that he'd be in a team meeting with the likes of Teddy Tama and Gail Fiku, and he's shown clips of like Hugo Keenan and what like the Ireland attack and his role. So this is what happens, like people study you. So the challenge for this Ireland team, for Andy Farrell, for Mike Catt in terms of his attack, is evolving. I think Ireland stood still in 2019, and that England game was so damaging, like that the wheels came off. But I agree that there's no sense about this Ireland team, because I don't think there's any sense of complacency. I still think Andy Farrell is keeping guys on his toes, like dropping Joey Carberry was a bombshell. Yeah. And that sends out a message to guys who not necessarily in the starting 15 but in the fringes. Like, let's not forget, like, Joey Carberry was a key part of Ireland's first choice 23s, and drop him at this stage I think really sends out a message. And that's something we've seen from Farrell, I think, over the last kind of maybe 12 months. I think he spent so much of his early reign kind of building up Camp Ireland again and making it a more relaxed environment, but I think he's bared his teeth a little bit over the last while. You think about the amount of guys who got dropped after that Ireland A game in November against the All Blacks 15. And even, the Ulster players, like a raft of them, I know they weren't playing well, but they looked like they were going to be a key part of this World Cup cycle. So I think he's been a bit ruthless as well, and that's no harm at all, because it keeps everyone on their toes.
And that was just a snippet of our full Six Nations preview with Cian, Tracey and Matt Williams. You can listen to the whole thing by going to our podcast, Rugby on Off the Ball, wherever you get your podcasts. Search for it there and you'll be able to listen to the full almost an hour, Arthur tells me, while he was giving out to me for going on too long. You can listen to the whole thing there, or if you want to stay on YouTube, there's another clip right here.